In just 17 seconds, a boy died alone in a Texas detention cell with zip ties on his wrists and no one to call his name. Jasmine Crockett held up his photo in the middle of a live national hearing right after Governor Greg Abbott screamed at her to get out of Texas. The room froze. America blinked. What truth was so devastating it made the most powerful man in Texas fall silent? On live TV, the red tally light blinked once, then stayed. That meant live, no cuts, no do-overs. The chamber of the Rayburn House office building, usually a space for stiff, bureaucratic banter, now throbbed with silent electricity. The gold crest of the Congressional Oversight Committee shimmered under a dozen overhead rigs. Camera crews were crammed into corners, their lenses trained on one woman's chair. And she hadn't even sat down yet. Jasmine Crockett stepped into the room without a word. Her navy blue blazer cut sharp against the wood-paneled backdrop, but it was her eyes, steady, unreadable, that caught attention first. Behind her trailed two aides, one carrying a locked leather case. She paused just before the table, scanning the room like a chess player about to make her opening move. At the far end sat Governor Greg Abbott, legs crossed, hand resting on his chair like it belonged to a throne. He didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth curled slightly, like he already knew the cameras were rolling and the whole country was watching him, not her. The hearing was officially titled Federal Immigration Enforcement Oversight, Ethical Boundaries, and Human Impact. But everyone knew that was just air freshener sprayed over something rotten. This wasn't about enforcement. It was about exploitation. And Jasmine knew the name that would haunt the room long after today wasn't Abbott's. It was Elias, 13 years old, born in El Paso, dead in a holding cell less than 3 miles from his grandmother's house. Jasmine hadn't known him, but she'd seen the photo, the position of his arms, the zip tie cuts on his wrists. The autopsy report had used the words asphyxiation by posture. What it meant was this: he suffocated sitting upright alone in a cage built for criminals. Greg Abbott had signed the executive order that funded that holding center, and now he was sitting just feet from the woman holding the evidence of what it cost. A nearby producer leaned toward a floor assistant and whispered, "He wants to make this his stage." Jasmine heard it. She didn't flinch. What happens when the nation's loudest voice meets the one woman who won't flinch? Jasmine leaned into the mic, her voice clear-anchored. "Governor Abbott, under your command, Operation Lone Star, has detained over 47,000 migrants, most without formal charges. 81% of them were Black or Latino. Do you recognize how dangerous that ratio sounds to the communities you're supposed to serve?" Greg Abbott didn't flinch. He sat still like a statue carved out of politics and pride. "Texas has a right to protect itself," he replied coolly. "The Biden administration left our border wide open. I stepped in to close it." "But you didn't close it," Jasmine countered. "You turned it into a funnel, one that targets color, not crime. We've seen Texas citizens arrested for simply being near the highway. We've seen kids like Elias, 13, no record, no threat, end up in body bags." A flicker passed over Abbott's face. His smile faltered, his jaw tensed. "You're twisting the truth," he growled. "You're politicizing law enforcement." Jasmine didn't blink. "I'm humanizing the bodies you turned into numbers." The silence between them snapped tight like a wire. You could feel the temperature in the room drop by 5 degrees. Aides stopped moving. Reporters froze mid-scribble. Even the moderator looked suddenly smaller in his seat. Then Abbott snapped. He turned to face her, fully spine-straight voice climbing with each word. "You don't belong here," murmurs broke out. Jasmine narrowed her eyes. "You're not Texan enough to question me," he said louder. "And then get out of Texas." The sound rang like a gavel made of gunfire. No one moved. A boom mic operator standing near the door whispered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. On the back row, a woman from PBS put her hand to her mouth. Live feeds across CNN, C-SPAN, Fox, and YouTube all caught the same exact frame: Abbott standing furious, Jasmine sitting still like a storm, and the eye within it. She didn't say a word, didn't flinch, didn't even raise an eyebrow. It was as if his outburst had missed her entirely, or maybe it had landed and broken against something too solid to shake. And just like that, the question shifted from who shouted louder to who would speak next. Will she respond with fire or something far more dangerous? Jasmine didn't blink, didn't lean back, didn't flinch like they thought she would. while Abbott's words still echoed, "Get out of Texas." She moved with the stillness of someone who'd heard worse and survived. The kind of calm that only comes from knowing the truth is sitting beside you. She reached down slowly without a word. Her hand met the leather briefcase at her feet. She unclasped the locks, click, click. A sound louder than any insult just hurled across the room. The aides, the press, even the cameras seemed to lean closer, like something sacred was about to surface. From inside, she pulled out a single sheet. No fanfare, no pile of papers, just one photo, 8 by 10, black and white, already bent slightly at the corners. She didn't wave it, didn't shove it in his face. Instead, she turned it toward the audience, toward the cameras, and laid it flat on the witness table like it deserved to rest in peace. There he was, a child, Elias Jimenez, 13 years old, wearing a faded t-shirt with a cartoon rocket ship, his small wrists bound by plastic zip ties, his head slumped forward, eyes shut, the corner of his mouth stained with dried blood. He wasn't sleeping, he wasn't resisting, he was gone. The holding cell had no blankets, no food, no phone call, just concrete steel and hours of neglect. He died upright, suffocating slowly in the posture they forced him into. Jasmine's voice was low, steady, and more lethal than any shout. He was from El Paso. He died under your policy, Governor, and he will not be erased. The oxygen left the room. A woman behind the press table let out a soft gasp. One of Abbott's aides, a young man with a starched tie, turned a ghost white. A Capitol intern began to cry, silently shaking her head. The photographer from Reuters lowered his camera and whispered, "God help us." Abbott froze. He tried to shift in his seat, but his limbs betrayed him. His face collapsed inward. The pride, the smirk, it all evaporated. All that remained was a man exposed by a single photograph, and a woman who never raised her voice to do it. What if the quietest moment becomes the most unforgettable? The photo remained on the table like a wound no one dared touch. Jasmine sat still for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then she spoke, not to Abbott, not to the cameras, but to the space Elias once filled. Her voice didn't tremble. It cut clean like memory, refusing to fade. "I met his mother in Houston," she said quietly. She came into the legal aid center holding a folder wrapped in a grocery bag. Said it was all she had left of him. Inside were school certificates, drawings, a photo of him in a Halloween costume. He was a spaceman that year. Said he wanted to go to the moon, but would settle for teaching fourth-grade math. He was born in El Paso. He'd never left Texas, never even saw Mexico. He loved the Astros, loved riding his bike to the gas station to buy sour candy, loved asking his mom impossible science questions she didn't know how to answer. The kind of questions boys ask when they still believe everything is possible. She told me he'd never been in trouble. Not once. No fights, no complaints. The only time his name came up at school was when he gave his lunch to a classmate who forgot theirs. That's who he was. Then she got a call. They said her son had been detained, no explanation, no school ID, just mistaken age. Hours passed, no lawyer, no phone call. Then another call, he was gone. Jasmine looked at Abbott now, not with fury, with the quiet weight of every mother's grief. They said it was routine, she continued. That's the word your office used, routine. As if a child suffocating in a windowless cell was just paperwork, as if his life fit in a checkbox. That boy was more Texan than anyone sitting behind that table, and you erased him with a shrug. Outside, justice for Elias was already trending, but inside, the only thing that moved was the tightening of jaws and the quiet breaking of hearts. How many stories like Elias's are still hidden in silence? The silence didn't last. It never does when the truth cuts too deep. A Republican senator from West Texas cleared his throat, leaned toward the mic, and forced out a laugh that didn't land. "We appreciate the Congresswoman's passion," he said, "but let's not turn this into emotional theater. We're here to talk about national security, not bedtime stories." The words hung there, bitter and thin. Jasmine didn't flinch. She turned her head, slow and deliberate, and met his gaze. "Bedtime stories," she repeated, almost under her breath. Then she pulled another document from her folder, unfolded it calmly, and held it in the air. "This is from the Department of Justice, dated last quarter," she said. 23 confirmed incidents of physical abuse inside state-run detention facilities. 9 involving minors. 7 resulting in hospitalization. 4 children under the age of 15. 2 died. That's not emotion. That's federal record. A low murmur spread across the room. Abbott shifted in his seat. His fingers tapped the desk. He glanced toward the moderator like a child looking for a parent to step in, but the moderator said nothing, just stared at the photo of Elias still lying on the table like it had nowhere else to go. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The report was doing the shouting for her. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, a retired Marine named Walter watched the hearing alone in his living room. He hadn't voted Democrat in 40 years. But as Jasmine spoke, he set down his glass and whispered to no one, "She's the only one telling the damn truth." Back in the chamber, the senator who'd called it theater shifted uncomfortably. Jasmine turned back to the room. Her words were slower now. "You can dismiss my tone. You can interrupt my time, but you can't erase the dead." Abbott leaned forward, eyes narrowing, but he didn't speak. Not yet. He knew something had changed. So did the audience. The room was no longer his. When facts failed to protect the powerful, what happens next? Abbott had been quiet too long, and silence didn't suit him. He straightened in his chair, pulled a stack of papers from his folder, and slapped them onto the desk with performative ease. His voice returned louder, colder, rehearsed. "This is what the Congresswoman won't tell you," he said. "Violent crime linked to illegal border crossings is up. Cartel activity is spreading through South Texas. Her agenda. It's dangerous, not just for Texas, for national security." He waved the documents like a sword, numbers flying past like bullets. Arrest records, smuggling data, words like invasion, infiltration risk. Jasmine didn't look impressed. She waited. Then when he paused for breath, she leaned forward and spoke so calmly, the air seemed to stop moving. "You want to talk numbers," she said. "Fine. Elias was one. Just one. Not a criminal, not a cartel member, not a number in your charts. He was someone's child." The papers in Abbott's hand sagged. No one spoke. No one moved. A VA hospital in Tulsa had the hearing playing in the waiting room. An older black veteran turned the volume up. In a church basement in rural Georgia, a women's Bible group stopped their discussion and sat frozen around the screen. Because that line, "he was one," hit harder than all the graphs combined. Abbott opened his mouth again, but whatever came out was quieter. Less certain. The room didn't belong to him anymore. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Every word landed like stone on marble. "You use statistics to erase pain," she said. "I use names to remember it." And just like that, the numbers stopped mattering. Can a single voice bend the weight of a state's denial? The photo had never moved, still flat on the table, still staring back at the nation like a ghost refusing to be buried. But outside that chamber, it had already escaped. Within 20 minutes, the clip was everywhere. MSNBC ran it on loop with the headline, "Crockett confronts Abbott with death of 13-year-old." Fox tried to spin it emotional stunt or accountability, but even they couldn't look away. Twitter couldn't keep up. TikTok exploded. The image of Elias, zip-tied and lifeless, slid into millions of living rooms before Abbott had finished his next breath. In a newsroom in New York, a senior producer muttered, "She just blew up the internet." At a hospital waiting room in Austin, a nurse turned the screen to face the others. "Y'all, look at her face." She didn't even flinch. Back in the hearing, the storm had just reached Abbott. His communications director rushed to his side, eyes wide, phone in hand. He leaned down, whispering sharp and fast. Abbott shook his head. His jaw tightened. No, he wasn't walking out. Not yet. Not like this. He adjusted his suit, sat straighter, lifted his chin like that would make him look taller than what was now towering over him. Then Jasmine leaned forward. Her voice didn't rise. "Governor, your power ends at the truth. And that photo, that's where it begins." Abbott blinked, just once. But it was enough. 1,000 miles away, a retired ICE agent named Michael Torres sat alone in his garage. The clip played on his laptop again and again. He had processed paperwork like that. Deaths, minor detainees, routine. That was the word they all used. Now his hands shook, and for the first time in years, guilt broke through the cracks he'd sealed shut. He pressed pause. stared at the image of Elias, then at Jasmine, and whispered to no one, "God forgive us." Back in the room, Abbott didn't respond. Couldn't. The numbers he once threw like weapons had fallen flat. The narrative was no longer his to control. The photo wouldn't disappear, and neither would she. What happens when truth refuses to fade from the screen? The clip had gone viral, but what followed wasn't noise. It was something deeper, a hum, then a rumble, then a wave. It started with a nurse in San Antonio. Her shift had just ended. She caught the hearing on a break room screen and froze mid-step. Jasmine's voice cut through the static of her day. That photo of Elias alone, broken, forgotten, stayed with her. She snapped a picture of her TV and posted it to Facebook with 9 words. That woman just spoke for every voiceless soul in Texas. The post caught fire. Comments poured in. Hundreds of them. Nurses, mothers, teachers. People who had no power suddenly realizing they had a voice. Then came the vet. Retired, Vietnam, a lifelong Republican who hadn't voted blue since the Carter administration. He watched the moment alone in his Fort Worth home. When Jasmine looked into that camera and named the dead, something cracked open. He tweeted, "I don't agree with her politics, but I respect her guts." That's what leadership looks like. By nightfall, over 200,000 Americans had echoed him. Abbott's pollster was already sweating. The campaign dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Drop in confidence among independents. Sharp rise in negative sentiment from suburban voters. His fingers flew over his phone as he texted Abbott's top aide, "This could cost us re-election." The reply came seconds later. A single emoji. A flame. Back inside the hearing room, the committee chair gave Jasmine the signal. "Wrap it up. Time's done." But no one looked ready to move on. The energy had shifted. The room didn't belong to Abbott anymore. Jasmine closed her folder slowly, took a moment, let the stillness work for her. Then she spoke. Not loud, not rushed. "I'm not here to destroy Texas," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "I'm here to remind her who she was, before she forgot." No one interrupted. Not this time. The room stayed still. Outside the Capitol, something was building. Students gathered on the steps. Faith leaders locked arms in silence. Veterans held American flags upside down, not in protest of the country, but in mourning for the truth. Candles flickered under cloudy skies. Someone played a recording of Elias's voice on a speakerphone. The air hung heavy. Talk shows debated strategy. Cable networks split frames and argued angles. But none of it mattered, because the people weren't debating. They were remembering, they were choosing, and they were speaking back. When truth finds its echo, how loud can a nation become? The session was minutes from closing. You could feel it. The air had changed. The fire had burned through, and all that remained was smoke and ash. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not yet. Not with that photo still on the table and one final truth waiting to speak. She reached into her folder once more, this time not for paper. It was a phone. Small, black, worn around the edges. She tapped once, then again. A simple audio file. No edits, no filter. Just 17 seconds long. She placed the phone near her mic. Pressed play. A boy's voice crackled through the room. Thin, high-pitched, uncertain. You could hear the panic he was trying to hide beneath his words. "Mommy, don't cry. I'm okay. I'll see you soon. Okay, I love you." Silence swallowed the room whole. 17 seconds. That was all it took. A conservative senator, 2 chairs down from Abbott, took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes. His lip trembled, and he didn't bother hiding it. A young staffer turned away, biting his fist. Someone in the gallery started crying quietly. Abbott didn't move. He didn't reach for his papers, didn't wave a chart, didn't glance toward his aide for a talking point or exit plan. He stared at the floor, his jaw locked, his hands folded, his shoulders no longer square. For the first time all day, he looked small. Jasmine turned toward the cameras, toward the millions watching who had no seat in that room. Her voice was softer now, but more final than anything she'd said all day. "Governor Abbott told me to get out of Texas," she said. "But I'm here because Elias can't be." No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. It wasn't victory. It was mourning. Outside, the crowd had grown. Someone had placed a pair of child's sneakers on the Capitol steps. Next to them, a sign that simply read, "He should have come home." The hearing adjourned, chairs scraped, papers rustled. But Abbott remained seated, still staring down, still silent. When power can no longer speak, who carries the voice of the silenced? By morning, the clip had crossed 40 million views. It wasn't trending anymore. It was seared into the timeline of a nation. From breakfast tables in Boston to gas stations outside El Paso, people weren't just watching. They were replaying, they were sharing, and they were reckoning. Texas newspapers split right down the middle. Abbott, humiliated on live TV, screamed one front page. Another countered with Crockett turns grief into a reckoning. Editorial boards scrambled to rewrite their angles. Talk radio lines were jammed. Pastors rewrote their Sunday sermons. One anchor on a conservative station whispered off camera, "I think we just watched history." Letters flooded into Jasmine's office. Thousands. From veterans, teachers, single mothers, and even ICE agents. One was handwritten, trembling, from a retired ice field officer in McAllen, Texas. "I processed kids like Elias," it said. "I told myself it wasn't my call, but I see now that silence was a choice. I'm sorry." In Houston, they gathered by candlelight. Over 2,000 people stood shoulder to shoulder in the plaza outside City Hall. Some held candles, some held photos. Some just stood in silence, letting the weight of it all settle. Elias's mother was there, wrapped in her son's Astros blanket, clutching his school ID like it was a shield. Jasmine stood behind her. No speech, no cameras, just presence. The moment wasn't red or blue anymore. It wasn't party lines or political plays. It was something older, something buried in the bones of a country still trying to remember what justice looks like when it speaks softly and refuses to back down. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a single voice still echoed. Can one voice truly rewrite the memory of a nation? The celebration wasn't universal. It never is. As the views climbed and the vigil lights burned, the backlash came. Swift, brutal, predictable. Abbott loyalists flooded the airwaves, branding Jasmine a radical, a disgrace, a threat to Texas values. Conservative pundits called for her censure. Anonymous messages poured into her office, some mocking, some violent, many chilling in their precision. One simply said, "We know where you live." Texas doesn't forget. Capitol Security doubled her detail. Her team screened every envelope twice. Staffers who once joked in the hallway now spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting. The photo of Elias, once laid quietly on that hearing table, was now pinned to her office wall like a scar that wouldn't heal. But still, the letters kept coming. Hundreds. From places Jasmine had never been. From people she never thought would care. Teachers, grandparents, pastors, veterans who hadn't voted Democrat in decades. Some came with drawings, others with folded flags. In one quiet moment, no cameras, no advisors, Jasmine sat alone in her office and opened a small blue envelope. Inside, a single handwritten line. "Because of you, I finally told my daughter about her uncle who died in detention." She stared at the words, read them twice, then a third time. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed. Long, deep, slow. The kind of breath that carries both weight and fire. She was tired, bone tired, not just from the fight, but from how long it had lasted, from how much was still ahead. But she wasn't broken, not even close. Outside her window, the Capitol dome gleamed under a pale sky. And somewhere across the country, another mother was finally telling the truth. What does it take to keep going when the storm never ends? It was the same room, same chairs, same stiff air, and echoing lights. Nothing had changed, but everything felt different. Jasmine walked in alone this time. No aides, no files, just something wrapped carefully in linen tucked under her arm. She sat in the same seat as before. No one said her name, but every eye followed her. The chair creaked as she leaned forward, hands calm, eyes clear. She didn't scan the room for allies or opponents. She just waited until the moment was hers again. The hearing itself was uneventful. Numbers, budgets, testimony that blurred into static. But when it ended and the final gavel fell, Jasmine remained seated. Then she stood, slowly stepped to the center of the table, and unwrapped what she'd brought. It wasn't the photo of Elias. This time it was his mother, caught in a moment at the vigil wrapped in her son's Astros blanket, holding a candle smiling through tears that hadn't dried. It wasn't a political statement, it was a human one. She placed the frame gently on the table, straightened it, let it sit there in the middle of the room glowing under fluorescent light. For a full 10 seconds, she said nothing, just stood with it like she was leaving a piece of truth behind. Then she spoke, soft but steady. This isn't about left or right. It's about right and wrong. And I will not leave Texas, because justice lives here too. No applause, no rebuttal, just stillness. She nodded once, collected her coat, walked out with the same quiet force she had months before. No victory lap, no headlines chased her heels. She didn't need them. Outside, a single 5-second clip hit social media. Her placing the frame. The caption said only, "She stayed." It spread like a heartbeat. No outrage, just reverence. Sometimes you don't have to raise your voice to make an entire nation listen. You just have to stand firm for what's right, even if you're standing alone. Jasmine's silence didn't just shake a chamber. It reminded us that justice doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room, but to the one who refuses to look away. If one photo can awaken a country's conscience, what truth in your life is still waiting to be spoken? Share your thoughts below. If this story stayed with you, don't let it fade into the scroll. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where silence becomes strength and one voice can change everything. Tap the bell because the next story might speak for someone you love. Which moment spoke to you the loudest? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters more than ever. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over, it's just waiting to be heard.